In the last Perek, in Perek Yud, in chapter 10, we learned about the sadik. Now we're going to learn about the rasha. And then the next Perek, in chapter 12, is where we start learning about the Beinoni. And just as we had two levels in sadik, you had sadik v'toivli and a sadik v'rali, the perfect sadik and the imperfect sadik. So corresponding to that, you have two levels in rasha. You have the sadik gomer and the sadik she'eni gomer, the perfect sinner and the imperfect sinner. Those are the corresponding to the perfect sadik, the sadik gomer. You have the rasha gomer, the perfect rasha, and corresponding to the sadik v'rali, you have the rasha v'toivlei, or the rasha she'eni gomer, the incomplete rasha. And just like generally speaking, sadik v'toivlei, the sadik gomer, the complete sadik, is one level. It's a level where the nefesh habahamis has been absolutely transformed. Whereas the sadik v'rali, as the Alter Rebbe explains, there are 18,000 levels of sadik v'rali, of the imperfect sadik. There are many gradations. The same is true also. Rasha Gomer is a certain level. That's the lowest level. And then in the incomplete Rasha, you have many, many different levels. Before we get to that, and talking about the levels, both the Tzaddik and the Rasha, what they both have in common is a disequilibrium. Meaning, Hashem created us with a nefesh alakis and a nefesh abahamis, a godly soul and an animal soul. When both of them are at full strength, that's called an equilibrium. And the result of that, as we're going to discover in the future chapters, is going to be a Beinoni. Because for whatever reason, which we're going to explore again in next Perek, if both the Nefesh Alakis and the Nefesh Abahamis are at full power, then the one who is going to actually get its way is the Nefesh Alakis, and the person is going to do only mitzvahs. And that doesn't mean that the Nefesh Abahamis has been weakened in any way, but that means that when they're both at full strength, then the Nefesh Alakis is the one that gets its way. The Tzaddik, there's a disequilibrium. In other words, by the Tzaddik, the Nefesh Abahamis has been weakened. As we learned at the at length in the last chapter, the Tzaddik is someone, it's not just, Tzaddik is not about a certain behavior, but a Tzaddik is much deeper than that. A Tzaddik is about what's going on inside the person. And by a tzaddik, the nefesh alakis and the love for Hashem is so strong to the point that either the nefesh abahamis has been significantly weakened, which that would be the imperfect tzaddik, the tzaddik she'eni gomer, or if you're the ultimate tzaddik, to the point that the nefesh abahamis has actually been transformed to kedusha. But the point is, in the inside of a tzaddik, what makes the tzaddik unique is not only that he behaves perfectly, because as we're going to learn later, the Beinoni also behaves perfectly. What makes the tzaddik unique is that there is no they're not aligned with each other. It's not. There is no. It's not a fear game anymore. The nefesh alikis has the advantage.
But the Beinoni has a chance to be a tzaddik. Tzaddik doesn't have a chance to be a tzaddik of a tzaddik.
Doesn't have a chance to what?
To be higher than tzaddik. Beinoni at least can go up and be a tzaddik again.
So you're saying it's boring to be a tzaddik?
That's right.
It's a thing we keep on coming back to.
Bracha.
Okay, I bless you with such a boring life.
Amen. It's a bracha.
Amen.
Yeah. The rasha also has this disequilibrium. The rasha also, but there it's the opposite way, because the rasha is the opposite of the tzaddik. And the rasha, again, it's not only about the way that he behaves, it's not only about the behaviors and actions, or even speech and thoughts, it's about what's going on inside. The fact that a yid can do an avera, well, that's awful that a yid does an avera, but that's emblematic. That's a symptom. The avera is the symptom. That's not the root problem. The root problem is that inside. That means that the nefesh habahamis has gained an advantage over the nefesh alikis. It has weakened the nefesh alikis to the point that a person could succumb and do an avera. Because if the nefesh alikis is at full force, there's no way in the world would ever allow that a yid should do an avera. So that's what we have. The tzaddik is the one where the nefesh alakis has the advantage. The rasha is the one where the nefesh habahamis has the advantage. And what is the advantage of the nefesh habahamis by the rasha? So there can be many, many different levels. The moment a yid does one avera, he's already considered a rasha. Again, an imperfect rasha, a sadik, a rasha v'toivloi. There's still plenty of good going on inside. This is a person who 99% of the time is doing what's right, theoretically. In other words, there are many different levels. You can have someone who's doing the right 75%, 25%, as the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss. But even the fact that a person does one Avera already shows that it's not equal footing. That the Nefesh Bahamis has somewhat of an advantage over there. One Avera makes a person a rasha. Again, a person can theoretically do tshuva and become not a rasha anymore. But one Avera already shows that this is there's a problem over here. And a lot of people have issues with this, So I did one Avera, so I become a rasha. So I did 99% of the time. So I did. I'm doing the right thing. Once a month, I slip and I do an Avera, I'm a rasha. So the simple answer to that is, so imagine a person who is arrested and brought to trial for murder. And he tells the judge, well, yeah, I did kill that person, but I think you're being very unfair to me. 99.9% of the time, I'm not a murderer. So you're really going to put me away in prison for my entire life because of the 0.01%? It makes no sense. You have to judge me based on my
Lifetime.
my lifetime, my regular everyday, right? But the answer is that you murder once, you're a murderer. You do an Avera once, you're a rasha. Talking about being in terms of our relationship with Hashem. So you do an Avera once, you're married b'malchus. A person, if the king tells you to do something, and even if you did it 100 times, and once you didn't do it, you're married b'malchus, and according to halacha, you're chayiv misa, right? So you didn't Avera once, you're a rasha. But over here, we're talking something deeper than that, which is that the fact that you did an Avera once shows that there is this imbalance. How big is this imbalance, or how slight is this imbalance? That depends on your level. But the moment there's that imbalance, you're already a rasha because your Nefesh Elokis is weaker than Nefesh Bahamis. If they're both on the same level, you would never have done an Avera.
So how do you do the first Avera?
In other words, how does Nefesh Bahamis...
If the Nefesh Elokis win, then how is it ever...
Look, in other words, you're starting off with an assumption. You're asking, how is it that a person can do their first Avera? Because if they never did an Avera, then Nefesh Bahamis doesn't gain strength. But I think the premise of that question is to be questioned. In other words, your premise is that the only way to weaken my Nefesh Bahamis is by doing an Avera. So if I didn't do an Avera, how would I weaken it? The only way to weaken my Nefesh Elokis and to strengthen my Nefesh Bahamis. The strength of the Nefesh Bahamis is a very natural thing. We're born with a very, very strong Nefesh Bahamis. And the strength of the Nefesh Elokis has to be maintained, and that has to be built, actually. That's not as natural. So, the question, if anything, is how do I strengthen my Nefesh Elokis to get it to the point that it should be, at that point, at equal strength, where it can constantly be doing battle with the Nefesh Bahamis. So I think, and that's a question which we're going to be answering over the coming chapters. How do I make sure that my Nefesh Elokis is always at full strength, that it can constantly be doing battle with my Nefesh Bahamis? Although for the Beinoni, as we'll be learning in later prakim, we're resigned to the fact that my Nefesh Bahamis will always be at full strength. The Nechama is that if my Nefesh Elokis is also at full strength, I'll be doing the right thing. That's but the rasha is someone again where there isn't that equilibrium.
But you see, they give chance to the Beinoni or the rasha. It said, Shiv'a yipol v'yakum. You can have 7 times you fall, but you get up. So Hashem or the Torah, they give him chances more than everybody else to get up.
That's correct. We can always get up. We can always do tshuva. We can always get up. We're not bound by the level where we are currently. That's true. Yes.
Maybe the Baal Tanya deals with this later. Maybe dealt with it before. We've been saying before that the Sonic Gomer has a total Dveikus B'Hashem, that he's totally clinging to Hashem. I'm not sure how much we've talked about his total chachma to be a gon olam, because if someone never does an avera, one would assume that he knows everything that would ever be an avera. If you don't know every nuance of deraisa, derabanan, minhag, everything that you could ever be over on, then you're gonna get something wrong. So that's another element besides clinging to God is knowing everything that He doesn't want you to do.
Rabbi Yisrael Salanter once said that it's easier to finish Shas than it is to transform and to change one midah that you have.
Okay.
Whoa.
So you're saying that the tzaddik also has to his credit that he's a goyim.
Yes.
And I'll argue that that's much easier task.
Okay.
I mean, in other words, yes, of course, the
okay.
tzaddik, in order to know, but that that's something. There are many goyim out there. How many tzaddikim are there? Are there? That's
But I would seem that it's built into the
well
not doing any averos is knowing all of Torah, not that you can't.
You're putting it that way. I could put it in a different way also, which is not negating what you're saying. The Rebbe mentioned several times the idea of that even to be a Beinoni, you have to be a pasuk pumi megirsa, someone who never is mevatel Torah. So someone who's never mevatel Torah is, they say, I think it was I've heard the story said about different people, but I think I also heard about the Chassam Sofer, that he once made a siyam hashas, and he made a big simcha and a big party. And they asked him, "Why are you so excited? You finished Shas many times. Why are you getting? What's so special about this one time that you finished Shas?" So he said, "This is different. This is the Shas that I finished in 15 minutes." I said, "What? You finished Shas in 15 minutes?" He said, "You have to understand. Aside from my regular maslul, my regular scheduled program and learning, I had another on the side, a separate. That's what I'm looking for."
Project.
Separate project, which is whenever I have 15 minutes to spare between this and between that, I had a Gemara on me that I would learn. And now I finished that Shas on that schedule. The odds and ends times, which I didn't waste, instead of taking out my phone and checking whatever, I learned the Gemara. And that's why to him was a very special simcha, that finishing Shas, because it was the 15-minute Shas. So he finished Shas in the whole, and all the times that he, so if someone is like pasuk pumi begirsa, someone is talking about mevatel Torah, so they also know a lot of Torah simply because you're arguing from one direction, I'm supporting you from another direction. Yes, they're both correct.
Uh-huh.
Let's do inside Perek Yud Aleph. Again, page 30. V'zelu umaza. We already encountered this expression earlier in Tanya, that Hashem always creates that whatever there is in Kedusha, there is a corresponding concept or idea in Klippa. So just like we have in Sadik, we have two levels. There's the Sadik V'toivlei and Sadik V'ralei, which is the Sadik Gomer and the Sadik She'eni Gomer. So the same thing we have in the rasha. Rasha V'toivlei, the incomplete rasha, is L'umas Sadik V'ralei, corresponds to the incomplete Sadik. That's what we're going to talk first. First we're going to talk about the incomplete rasha, which by the time we finish, we'll realize that the incomplete rasha encompasses probably 99% of Klal Yisrael. In other words, you have 99% of us are the incomplete rasha, and somewhere in the other 1%, you have the complete rashas, and the incomplete tzaddiks, and the complete tzaddiks. What is this incomplete rasha? The hainu shatayiv shebenafshi elikis. The incomplete rasha is someone who the goodness and the godliness, which is within his nefesh elikis shebemoichai, which is in the mind, ubechali yimani shebelibay, in the right ventricle of the heart, kafuf ubatel, to a certain degree, is somewhat subservient, is somewhat subjugated, legabi hara, to the evil, mahaklipa shebechal hasmali, which is from the klipa, which is in the left side of the heart. And just like there are, as we mentioned, there are tens of thousands of levels of the incomplete tzaddik, so here too also, there are tens of thousands of levels of the incomplete rasha. And this is both the difference between one person, one incomplete rasha and another, is both in terms of quality and in quantity of the bittul ukfifas hatoiv lerachas shalom. In in what way, in what matter does it express itself, the subservience of the nefesh elokis to the nefesh bahamis. Yeshmi, and now the first thing the Alter Rebbe is going to do, the Alter Rebbe is going to talk about the highest level of the incomplete rasha. In other words, the one who was a notch lower than the Beinini. Yeshmi, there is one, Shakfifa v'bitul etzloi, that by him, the subjugation and the bittul of the nefesh elokis to the nefesh bahamis, his ma'at mazer is very little. In other words, the imbalance is very slight. V'af gam zoyis, and moreover, eini betmidus. It's not something which is constant. It doesn't express itself constantly, this imbalance. V'lei tadir, not even frequently. Liprakim krevim, at regular intervals. Ella rather li'itim rechukim. It happens on rare occasions. Misgaber hara latoiv, that the evil overpowers the good. The koivish ir ketanan, conquers the small city, hu aguf, which is the body. Achlei kulei, but not completely. In other words, it doesn't happen often, and even when it happens, we're not talking about a complete overrunning, but it'll express itself in a slight way. El miktsasi levad, it only conquers it slightly. She is salam ashmata, it only in a slight way it causes that the person should do its bidding. Venasali merkavo lavush. At that time, the person becomes a chariot and a vehicle and a garment. That one of the three garments of the nefesh bahamis finds expression in the body. The hainu. Meaning, sometimes a person will do an avera only b'maisa, only in action. Lasis averas kalis. We're talking here again. We're not talking about big averas. Talking about a small avera. V'lechamuris chas v'shalom. We're not talking about something big.
We're talking Mesid or even Shogeg?
We're talking Mesid. There are some people who do Averis, but Mesid.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't spell out that's why I asked.
Right. Well, if a person does an Avera b'shegig, I don't think that makes it depends. I guess it depends what kind of level of shegig you're talking about. There are different levels of shegig also. A shegig, you have to bring a carbon for at the end of the day. Then there's a level of oinus. So is the shogig because the person wasn't careful enough?
That could be like an Avera, so.
Then that itself is a lapse, right?
Gross negligence.
Uh-huh.
There is negligence and there's gross negligence, right? There are many different degrees.
Inappropriate things.
Or, for example, once in a while this person will be nichshal, the person will stumble. B'dibur levad. We're talking about this. Such a person says ma'isa chasad. Person this never will actually do an avera, but b'dibur. To do an Avera B'dibur, what's the big deal? We're not talking about big Averas. Avak Lashon Hara, Ulatzanis. What's Avak Lashon Hara? So in Halacha, there are many different examples. Something it's not full-blown, full-fledged Lashon Hara, but it's Avak. There are different examples brought down in Shulchan Aruch of Avak Lashon Hara. For example, someone comes over to you and tells you, so tell me about this guy. What do you know about this guy? And you say, about that guy, I don't want to talk.
That's the one. It's already derogatory.
I'm such a tzaddik. I'm not going to say any lashon hara. So in halacha, that's called avak lashon hara. It's avak lashon hara.
How do you handle
Implied lashon hara. What?
How do you handle it the right way in such a scenario that you just brought up?
That's a very good question. Very good question. I guess find something good to say. I guess it depends when, depends what. I didn't say lie. I said find something good to say. Yeah, but listen, we're not going to get into. You can learn the whole sefer and shmir salashin and figure out. And there are sometimes when you're allowed to say the truth, even if it is derogatory. In other words, this is halachas that we, as you said, if you want to be a beinoni or a sadik, you have to know all the halachas, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You
Gotta learn the halachas.
Yeah.
What to say, what not to say. Correct. Another example even brought down in Shulchan Aruch is that if you praise someone in front of the person's enemy, that's also avak lashon hara, because you should be aware of the fact that if you're going to praise him, you're going to automatically
induce lashon hara.
Illicit lashon hara. So therefore, you take somewhat of the blame. So here we're talking about someone who's over avak lashon hara. We're not talking about full-fledged lashon hara or litzanos. And here also, the word avak refers also to avak lutzanas. In other words, we're not talking about full-blown mockery, but avak lutzanas sometimes, imply it. Or for example, b'machshava levad. Sometimes the person will stumble only in machshava. Each one, machshava, dibur, maisi, each one is unique, and each one has its own advantages and disadvantages. What does it mean to sin b'machshava? Hirhuri aveira, akashim aveira. Thoughts of aveira that are worse than aveira itself. Now, so the Rebbe talks about this and says that there is no issur really to think about an aveira. In other words, if you're to sit and you're to think about a ham sandwich and envision yourself eating it, you weren't over any avera. Maybe you're over the issur of bittul Torah. But if you're, let's say, if you're in the bathroom and you think about eating a ham sandwich, there's no avera. Yeah, you might be strange, but there is issur. It doesn't say anywhere you're not allowed to do it.
So what's machshava kemaisa?
Machshava kemaisa means that when a person thinks about doing a mitzvah, and he was stopped from doing it, then he gets the credit for doing a mitzvah.
Only for mitzvah, not for avera.
Only for a mitzvah, correct. And it's only if you wanted to do it and you were trying to do it, and for some reason due to circumstances beyond your control, you're prevented from doing it. But otherwise, that also doesn't apply. In other words, you can't say, okay, I'm going to wake up in the morning. Okay, today I don't plan on putting out tefillin. But you know what? I'll think about it. Machshava kemaisa, so I'm all good. It doesn't work that way. So machshava kemaisa is a very limited, has a very limited application, as important as it may be. Hirhuri avera here, but Pashto is talking about there's one area of an avera where it is forbidden actually to think about it, and we're talking specifically about taivas nashim, about thinking about immoral or illicit relationships, or
what about fear?
Actively. That's another example. Yes, those are the two averas which are asur, and the Gemara says in the pasuk of I think it was Beis Yisrael. I think machshavtam. I think the pasuk is those two things. Hirhuri avera can refer either to thoughts about aveda zara or kfira, or thinking about taivas nashim. Those are two areas where we're not allowed to think. So again, what if someone slips up once in a while in thinking of something of that sort? Again, this is the incomplete sadik, the incomplete rasha. So either he'll slip once in a while in a small little maisa avera, or in a dibur avera, but a small one again, not full-fledged lashon hara, or in thought. And even though that one might think, so it's a thought, what's the big deal? But Chazal tell us, no, hirhuri avera, hakashim avera. On a certain level, thoughts of avera even worse than avera, because at the end of the day, when you do something, to a certain extent, it's removed from who you are. It doesn't necessarily define you, an action that I do when I have a bad moment, or even words that I say. If I say something inappropriate, okay, you say it and you move past it, you move beyond it. Machshava, on the other hand, is because it's a lavush which is a miyuchad with the nefesh. Even though it's not a lavush of the nefesh, it's a garment, as we learned. Machshava dibur ma'isa are garments, but it's a garment which is miyuchad. It's very, very close to who you are, and therefore it has the strongest impact. And in fact, we're talking here before about lashon hara. So later on in Tanya, but Negeres HaKodesh, I don't know if forever you can get there even. So Alter Rebbe there talks about, there's lashon hara, but then Alter Rebbe says there's deeper than that, which is don't think something bad about another yid, because to a certain extent, thinking bad about another yid is even worse than saying something bad about another yid, because the impact that it has on your nefesh when you have such thoughts is very, very deep and very, very strong. So therefore, to a certain extent, hirhuri avera, akashim avera, thoughts of avera are even worse than the avera itself. Even if you're not thinking about to do the avera, in other words, it's not that you're thinking about, I'm going to do this avera, we're planning it. You're just thinking theoretically in an abstract manner about the zivug, the relationship between a man and a woman. We're talking about physical intimacy, which that's forbidden. According to Torah, that's something which a person shouldn't be thinking about. As the pasuk says, "When ishmarta mikol davar ra," you have to guard yourself from anything evil. And Chazal say in this, that a person shouldn't be thinking by day something which can lead him to impurity by night. Or another example of a small avera, it's a time when a person has the ability to study Torah, and instead he's wasting his time. As it says in the Mishnah, Ba'avis, Haner, Ba'laila, someone who is up by night, Umafana Liba, Chulu, and is just wasting his time. So over here, again, this is an Avera which is B'machshava. So we have to really understand why this is not Avera of Bittul Torah. He's making it sound like it's not Mamish the Avera of Bittul Torah, because Bittul Torah is, Alter Rebbe said already in Perik Aleph, Dvar Hashem Baza, Ikaras Tekaras, right. But this
It sounds like a Maisa that it sounds like he's doing something instead of learning. He's doing something else.
Yeah.
but also the Lashon is interesting over here. The
Well,
wording he
sounds like he's
used.
doing something.
Yeah, well, he's taking other stuff. He's daydreaming. The words, the Shas HaKosher, it's interesting words. In Perik Aleph it talks about Kol Misha Efshar Leilasek. He has here's Shas HaKosher.
So what's happening in Shasa Kosher?
There's a chance.
It's an opportune time. Block upon him. Over here, the point here is, there is no evil going on. We're not talking about someone, as opposed to everything we spoke about until now, the person did something wrong, b'maisa or b'dibur or b'machshava. Over here, it's simply abstaining from doing something which is proper. You're wasting your mind is wandering freely. Shabach asma kol elam. When a person does one of any of these sorts of things, okay, it's a ben or anything similar, nikra rasha be'esahi. The person is called the rasha. Why? Again, simple answer, because you didn't avera. But I'll tell you something, it's deeper. Why are you called a rasha? Because of what's going on inside you. The real reason rasha is a description of the person, not of the act. Because the fact that the person did this proves sharasha benafshe gover by that the evil within him has overpowered the nefesh elokis, umislabish begufay, and therefore is able to express itself and manifest itself in the body, umachtia, and therefore causes him to sin, umetamay, and makes him impure. However, we're talking here obviously about a good person. We're talking about a person who doesn't avera relatively infrequently, and even then, we're not talking about big averas, and even then it's only machshava, or only dibur, or only maisa. Now, what does such a person do after he slips up? Afterwards, immediately, the toiv once again reestablishes its position. And this person immediately has regret. And this person asks for forgiveness from Hashem. And Vashem Yislach, and the Eibishter will forgive him. Im shav b'tshuva ru'uya, if he does tshuva, a proper tshuva, al piyat sas chachamenu zal, according to the advice given by chachamim, b'shleisha chaluki kapara shay Rabbi Shmuel deiris chuluk meitzes bara b'makam acher. In Masechtas Yumas, it says over there, Rabbi Shmuel says there are three sorts of averis, and they come with three sorts of kaparas. If there's a person who does a mitzvah aseh was over, mevatel mitzvah aseh, abstains from doing a proper mitzvah. So over there, Rabbi Shmuel says that any zaz misham atchem moichlin immediately forgiven if a person does proper tshuva. Avar mitzvah leisasa, if a person does a mitzvah leisasa v'shav and he does tshuva, then tshuva toila v'yem akipurim mechaper. Then the tshuva, so to say, is it's what? It's a limbo, right? An abeyance, and then on Yom Kippur you receive the complete kapara. I want you to note, it doesn't say you get the mechila on Yom Kippur. The mechila you get right away when you do tshuva. But the kapara, which means when are you fully expunged and purified, what you've done is on Yom Kippur. And then if a person was over al krisis and Mrs. Bezdin, and a person was over on avera, which is a capital offense, whether capital offense be they through Bezdin or be they shemayim, so then Shuva v'yem kapurim toila and Yisurim mimarkim. As I state that the person Yisurim rinse off the effect of that avera. So the fact that three different averas and three different types of kaparas, that also symbolizes somehow that the tshuva is somewhat different for these three different types of categories. So therefore, if the person does a proper tshuva, as depending on the type of avera the person has done, the Eibishter will forgive him. But even, here's an important point to note, even after the person does tshuva, he's still a rasha. Why would that be? He's it says very clearly, Hashem yislach le, Hashem will forgive him, but he's still a rasha.
Still in balance?
There's still that imbalance. What's the proof there's an imbalance? The fact then in all probability it's going to happen again in a month from now, or in a week from now, or in a day from now, or in a year from now.
So what should he do now?
Yes,
How do you how you
general?
put this in equilibrium back?
That's an avoid the primis.
How? What do you
No,
do?
1 second. It's possible that the person should do tshuva and become a beinoni. It's possible the person should do tshuva and become a rasha and become a sadik.
Yeah.
In other words, if you build yourself up, what I'm saying is the simple fact that a person does tshuva doesn't necessarily remove him from the Tanya's definition of rasha. And again, as Dr. Rabbi made very clear also in the first part of Perek Tanya, there are different definitions of a rasha. So, for example, we know that there's a halachic definition of a rasha. A rasha is pasal edus. So, in terms of that definition, the person does tshuva, he's not considered a rasha in that sense, and he's kosher edus. But if you're looking at the true definition according to the sources and according to Chassidus of what a sadik, beinoni, and a rasha is, going back to Perek Aleph and all the different sources that Alter Rebbe brought for this idea of his concept of what rasha, sadik, and beinoni is, a sadik is someone who has an imbalance inside. It's not about the behavior. Again, it'll express itself in a certain behavior, but it's about what's going on inside. The rasha has a certain imbalance, which causes, depending on how big that imbalance is, if the imbalance is small, it'll cause that every once in a while he should trip. But because the imbalance is so small, and because the nefesh elokis is still very powerful, he'll also regret what he did. And the regret is a true regret. And he'll do tshuva. But that imbalance still exists. And until that imbalance is corrected, that person can still be a rasha. My point is, is that tshuva doesn't necessarily lift up the person out of the Tanya's definition of what a rasha is. So that is, until now we've talked about the highest level of a rasha. We're talking about someone who does an avera once in a while, infrequently. Again, we're talking about 3 different things over here. We mentioned, number 1, the avera, it's infrequent. Number 2, it's the avera, the nature of the avera, the quality of the avera, if you might want to say, is, the person, we're not talking about a person who does big averas. And number 3, third condition is that immediately after he does it, he's filled with remorse, and he does a proper tshuva. The words he uses is tshuva haruya. We're not talking about, we're talking about a person who does real tshuva.
So what causes the imbalance to begin with? He's born with it?
Of course, we're born with an imbalance, yes. What is the more Yetzer Lev Ha'adam or Ramin Urav, right? And that's why the Nefesh Elokis enjoys an advantage, and that's why we talk about Melech Zakin, Nefesh Bahamas, right? Akdima Tanase. It's older, it's more mature. It's called the Melech Zakin Uksil. It's called the Old King, and it's is called the Yelad Chacham U'Misked, right? It has an advantage not only in terms of time, but also in terms of natural predilection. It takes avodah to strengthen the Nefesh Elokis. How do we do that? We're going to learn as we go along. That's because Sefer Shel Beinanim is telling us how to become a Beinoni. So, but we still didn't even get yet to how to be a Beinoni because we're still busy defining the terms, including Tzaddik and
why should he
Rasha.
be liable for the avera if the cards are stacked against him? It's not his fault. I can tell you. He's born with a big Yetzer Hara.
That's a big.
I'm in the defense attorney here.
Like the tshuva.
No,
You're
but
saying this 99% of the people.
what did Levi say about this? You say?
No, I don't know what he said, but
No, because
I don't know what he said.
Actually, wasn't it-
This,
maybe it's him or maybe the Shpal Zayda, one of them picked up his head to heaven and said, Rabbeinu Shleim, I don't understand this. For some reason I think it's the Shpal Zayda. He says, you put all the taivas of this world, all the pleasures of this world, you put it all in front of our eyes. And then you wrote about Hashem and Gan Eden and Kedusha, you put it in the books. And then you say, I want you to choose between the two. He says, why don't you do it the other way around? He says, put Gan Eden and Kedusha and holiness in front of our eyes, write about the taivas in the books.
Nobody will go there.
and see who's going to choose that. Right.
That's a good time.
Yeah. But what do you gain from the taina?
No, I'm just talking in a theoretical sense.
In a theoretical sense, there is a good taina. Yeah.
Kosh Baruch Hu is
The Eibishter didn't put
fair,
us. It's not a cakewalk. No, just and fair means that the Eibishter guarantees you bechir chavshis. At any moment in time, you have the ability to have bechira chashish. That's what's called just and fair. Just and fair doesn't mean that it has to be easy for you to do it, and it has to be the easier way, the more pleasurable way. It means that you always have the ability to do what's right.
So why didn't he? We were going with like a equal.
If it was exactly equal, who would choose evil? Then there wouldn't be bechira chashish in a strange way.
Oh, I see.
Right?
So the initial conditions have to be that the nefesh bahamis has to be somewhat stronger over
Correct.
in order to have bechiras chavshis.
Correct. Correct.
Now I understand.
And now we're going to move on to more common people. V'yesh mi sharag giver b'yeser. Then there are the people who v'yesh mi is the first words in the line. Let's run a third of the way up from the bottom of the page, maybe a little more.
Yeah, okay.
V'yesh mi sharag giver b'yeser. There's some people. Lower levels of Rishonim are those who the evil is misgaber more often. In other words, not just in an infrequent way. Not only one at a time, but it could be machshava, dibur, and maisa, all of them at the same time. It makes the person do even worse averis. More frequently. However, bintayim, in between mischarit, the person has regret. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's only an imbalance. An imbalance means, by definition, that the nefesh elokis is still there, is still present, is still felt. And therefore, yes, over here the imbalance is much greater than the individual we discussed earlier, but because the nefesh elokis is still present, therefore, it expresses itself and it feels bad over the averis that he's done. This person has thoughts of tshuva from the goodness which is within the nefesh elokis, that strengthens itself somewhat in between the person's lapses. Ella, however, by this person, the nefesh elokis cannot doesn't have the power to overcome the evil lifresh mechatav legamri, to really leave behind the averis liyas meidava ezav, to actually confess and to abandon. In other words, this is very different than before. The person we were talking about earlier, if you notice the words he uses, tshuva, the person has a real tshuva, and he commits not to do it again, and he doesn't do it again. Maybe he'll slip in something else a few months later, or maybe even this itself, but at the moment he's really in a place, when he does tshuva, we're talking about the highest level of the imperfect rasha, it's a real tshuva. This person, he doesn't use those words. He talks about hirhuri tshuva. We're all very familiar with that. It's not a real tshuva. It's a hirhuri tshuva. I did something and I feel bad. I'm still going to do it tomorrow and the next day, but I feel bad. So on the one hand, it's not real tshuva. But on the other hand, what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is, where do those thoughts come from? They do come from the nefesh elokis. They do come from a good place and from a holy place. And they do have an impact somewhat. Regarding this, Chazal tell us, spot on Reishis Chachma, the name of Sefer Chasidim. It's an interesting line. Rishoy Maleim Charatas. Is there an analog to that? The English proverb in this? Rishoy Maleim Charatas. Evil people are filled with regrets. And you could look at that either way. You could look at it and say, what?
They didn't do it enough.
It's worthless. Yeah, all evil people are full of regrets. Or you could say, even the evil person, there's still the neshama is still beating inside, and therefore, no matter how many bad things that person does, there's still always the charata, there's the regret. So it's this is like the glass half empty or half full, and you can choose how you want to view that.
Why we said in Yom Kippur, Kol ha'omer yachtav v'ashu v'yachtav v'ashu, Yom Kippur v'nam chaper.
No, what?
He has charata,
Right.
v'ashu, yachtav v'ashu, yachtav v'ashu.
Achtav v'ashu means that you're standing by an avera, and you have the self-control to overcome and not do the avera, but you tell yourself, why should I control myself and not do the avera? I may as well indulge and enjoy myself, and I'll do tshuva afterwards.
It's like type of a show. It's beyond.
Right. So then we say, then doing tshuva is going to be almost impossible. You're going to have to work very hard to do tshuva on that. Eibishter is not going to help you do tshuva for that. But otherwise, it's not a person who does an avera because he's weak. It's not pshat that he's strong and he really could have abstain, but the only reason, in other words, Echtav Ashra means the reason why I'm doing the Avera is because I know I'm going to do tshuva afterwards. That doesn't apply to most people. Most people, when you do an Avera, it's because you're weak. So you're doing the Avera. It's not because you're doing it because the Cheshbon, you're going to make tshuva afterwards. Do tshuva. Shehem Reiv HaRishoyim, most Rishoyim, Sheyesh Bechinas Toiv Benafshem Adayin, that still have good, they're full of Charata. So, but if you notice, what we discussed over here was two extremes. And these are both the imperfect Rishoyim. The first person we discussed, as you might have realized, is a holy person. In other words, by our standards. We're calling him a rasha v'toivlei. But this is a person who's right. If I would describe to you, I tell you here, I have a shidduch for your daughter. And he's a person who's nizar in all Torah mitzvahs, and he's learning Torah all the time and doing all the mitzvahs. And once every few months, he's nichshal in a small little thing, either in machshava or in dibur or in ma'isa, but then immediately he does a proper tshuva. Who isn't running for that shidduch? Halavai, all of us should be on that madrega. So that was one extreme, the highest level, as we would say, a notch below Beinani, was the highest level of the rasha v'toivlei. And from there, the Alter Rebbe went to the lowest level. Here we're talking about a person who does big averis, and he does them frequently, machshava, dibur, and ma'isa, and between them he has regrets, but they're not substantial regrets. We're not talking about a regret which really has an impact on the person's life and causes him in any way to change his way. But what these two people both have in common is the imbalance. Now the question is, I'll get to you in a second, how big is the imbalance? The first person we mentioned, the imbalance is very slight. Very slight. The next person we mentioned, the imbalance is huge. But at the end of the day, what they share in common, and that's why I said earlier, 99% of people are in this category of rasha v'toivlei, because most of us have this imbalance. In other words, in a certain way, the nefesh habahamis is more powerful, which causes us to trip up and do things that are wrong. Again, the question is, how often and of what nature are those trip ups? Yes.
You said that when the habitual balavera does tshuva, he has charata. It's from the nefesh elokis that he does tshuva. Could it be that
it doesn't say he does tshuva? I just want to note.
All right, he has
Hirhuri tshuva. There's a difference.
Could
There's a difference.
Be that it's from the nefesh bahamis that it bothers. He doesn't, since the nefesh bahamis is self-oriented, he doesn't want to have regret. So it bothers. It's not l'shem shemayim. He does the hirhuri tshuva because he doesn't want that. He doesn't want that regret and. Or embarrassment, or for because it takes away from his kavod, but it's not that it's really. But if you could get away with
even if you can argue that's true some of the time, but again, for the average person, the nefesh elokis expresses itself with regret. Now you want to question?
Say what I'm saying, or is that just my idea?
The Baal Tanya doesn't discuss it in Tanya, and other places discuss this idea that the nefesh habahamis can also sometimes be tricky and come across, and have. Sometimes it's difficult to identify which one's which, but the premise of the Alter Rebbe, the basic premise, the idea is that most people, most Rishoyim, then it's simply an imbalance. An imbalance. So on the one hand, it's not good that there's this imbalance because that means the nefesh habahamis has the advantage, but an imbalance also implies that nefesh elokis is there, and therefore it does express itself. Is every regret from nefesh elokis? That's another question that can be discussed, but it doesn't impact what we're saying here. Yes?
What's the Beinani inflection point?
Sorry?
When is the Beinani inflection point? It seems that...
I'm sorry, I don't know what inflection point means.
Like, so when do you... So
What's the baseline for the...
No. So following all the classes so far, I've been watching them in
Okay.
as well. But maybe I missed something. My assumption was that the Beinani is somebody who is always winning the fight, right?
Correct.
So every single time you win the fight, you're not a Beinani?
Why don't we wait till next week? Because next week is where we really start discussing the Beinani. Till now, whenever we discuss the Beinani has been, I have to mention them for the sake of context. The first word of next perek, if you turn the page, is v'habeinani. I mean, that's the next chapter 12 is, analyzes and dissects the Beinoni from every which side. So I think we can hold on to that.
You have to be here next week.
Of course.
Or YouTube.
It's not the same.
Better be person than
Not the same. You don't want to wait.
I know. I
See,
I've watched
and then he
all
asks,
the
what
videos.
he says, I want to come. I don't want to watch it on YouTube. I want to come because then I get to ask a question. He asks a question, I deflect him anyway. He says, may as well watch it on YouTube, right?
You too.
It's actually funny.
Come to next week.
Of course.
It's a challenge. I was like, next time I'm able to come, I'm going to try to ask a question I'm actually going to answer.
Try again. Okay. And now we're going to come to the saddest possibility, and that is the rasha gomer. And the rasha gomer is the opposite, as you mentioned, of the sadik gomer. The sadik gomer is the one who has eradicated all evil, the nefesh bahamis, from within his midst. It doesn't occupy any space anymore. It's completely been eradicated. And the rasha gomer is someone who has accomplished almost the same. The rasha gomer is someone who the nefesh alikis, he has lost connection with it completely. It's not part of his psyche, it's not part of his consciousness, of his awareness, and let's do inside. However, misheni mischarat lo ilam, someone who never has charata. I hope that none of us know such people. And the truth is, we wouldn't know if we knew such a person or not, because this is something which is just like when you see a sadik, you don't know what level of sadik he is. There's really no way for an outside person to know whether a person has charata or not. Yes?
I think when you meet a tzaddik, you feel it. When you meet a rasha, you're going to feel it too. Don't you think so?
Yeah, but
If you feel that this person has an evil atmosphere surrounding him, you can feel whatever the vibrations is told, you can feel it, you know?
it's a difficult question to answer.
No, he has no conscience. Rosh Gomer has no
Has no conscience, right?
no conscience.
Misheni mischarta, never regrets. Ve'ein boim le'hirut tshuva klal. Never experiences any hirut tshuva. Nikra rasha v'rale. This is a rasha. Rasha b'nafshe hu levadi nishar b'kirbay. All that's left is the raz, the evil. Ki govar kol kach ala toiv. It has so overpowered the goodness. Ad shenestalak mekirbay, to the point. But here's the difference. The sadik gomer has transformed the nefesh bahamis to goodness. You can't transform the nefesh lakis to evil. You can't transform godliness into evil. What you can do is you can chase it away, you can expel it, but you can't actually impact it, transform it, right? So achin is dalek mikirbe, to the point that it has left, and it transcends the person. Makif means it surrounds the person. What does that mean?
He's not inside you, he's out of you.
Yeah, but what does that mean? It's not inside of you, it's outside of you. You have to understand, we're not talking, when neshama is a spiritual entity, so it's not limited spatially. So you can't say the neshama is here or not there. That's only three-dimensional objects are in one place and not another. It's like saying, where's 2 + 2 is 4. A neshama is your life force. So what does it mean that it has left you? That means, in a spiritual sense,
You're dead.
it doesn't have any impact on you any further. In other words, you've cut your ties. I'll give you an example. Talk about makif. If I were to give my class next week in ancient Greek, so everyone here could listen, and you'd hear the words just like you'd hear right? But
Not connected.
it didn't penetrate. It went over your heads. Right? Or if a nuclear physicist came and gave a lesson on it went over. What does that mean, went over your heads? Does that mean physically it went over your heads? No, you heard it. Every word went aside, but you couldn't process it at all. So, makif is a term in Chassidus which means something which is there and present and existent, but it's not being processed. It's not having an impact. It can't be assimilated by the mekabel. So, the rasha v'rale is the one who the neshama has no impact anymore. It's not being processed. It's not part of his seichel, his midas, the way his perception, the way he feels, but it's there because he's a yid. And therefore Chazal tell us, Akol be'asara shchinta sharia. Whenever 10 yidden are present, the shchina is there, and there is no exception to this rule. You can have a rasha gomer, and if he's the 10th for a minyan, you still have a minyan. How's that? Because the having the shchina which allows us to say Adavar Shebekdusha. The presence of the Shekhinah has to do with 10 neshamas coming together, and there are 10 neshamas here. Even someone who's a rasha v'raloi, the neshama is there also. Yes.
Even chas v'shalom, if that person's complete machal Shabbos,
How far?
so it can still be considered for minion.
You're asking a technical question. I'm not a Rav. I'm not going to answer the technical question. Whether he can be counted for a minyan. But the rule of Akol Be'asara Shchinta Shari, when he's there, the Shekhinah is there. It's possible that technically, for halachic reasons, he can't be counted. It is Makif Alav Malmaila. And because it's Makif, even though that it's not the Bepnimis, because it's Makif, therefore, and there were Akol on top. In other words, an Ephon of Makif, therefore, even such a Yikri Mitzaref to Minyanasa.
But it's cut off from
There was a Yid, the person whose name was Achan. In times of Yeshua,
It was mild.
and he did a lot of Avedas, Anyim Kippur, Mechalret, as the Gemara talks about it. And from him we learn the Eibishter said Chata Yisrael, Alpha Pisha Chata Yisrael. That's referring to Achan. The idea that every Yid has a neshama, regardless of circumstance, and that definitely has halachic applications also. You can have a Mechal Shabbos, or even someone who's a Eivid Aveda Zara. If he's Mekadosh a woman, she's Mekudashas. If a guy is Mekadosh a woman, she's not Mekudash. There's no din and kedushin over there. So absolutely. Now, so we finished Perek Yud Aleph. I just want to make clear, in terms of we've spoken about this many times, and we'll speak about it many times to come. It's very easy to say rasha v'rali. It's the most awful, horrible person that there is. But we mentioned many times, we're all tzaddikim, we're all beinanim, we're all rashaim, depending on which part of our life we're talking about. And we're all rasha v'ralis. We're all rasha gamers. Which area in your life, which area in my life, have we messed up so many times, and we don't consider it that important to the point that we don't even regret it anymore? Is that something, is that a ridiculous question to ask? Naslik right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what they say. It says, Avar Vashana, you do it twice, Naslik Heter. If you do it a third time, it's Naslik Mitzvah.
I didn't see that inside the song.
There are certain areas in our life where we're all passionate about, we're tzaddikim.
Soccer.
You know, comes Purim, you see everyone's tzaddikim. Last week, Thursday night. Really? It's such a beautiful Yom Tov, Purim. Everyone's running to do mitzvahs. And excited about it. And Shalach Mandas, Matanas, Lev Yenim, and Megillah Esther, and so there's Purim. It's partially beautiful to see. Partially looking in the streets and seeing Va'amich, there you see the Va'amich Kum Tzadikim, how Yidden are all Tzadikim.
We say Kulan Tzadikim, Kulan Navonim, we all know the Torah.
Kulan Tzadikim also says there?
In that good.
Yeah, they are good.
Tzadikim, yeah. Kulan Chachamim, Kulan Neveinu, Kulan Yidden Shkala Teira Kula. Maybe it's a different nusach.
Oh, no, okay. Okay, so
That's a lawyer nusach.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, there's this, reminds me of a good joke. There's a Rav gets up in Parshas Nitzavim, from the modern, doesn't know too much. He says, Atem Nitzavim Yim Kulchem Lefnei Hashem Alekeichem, and then the pasuk lists Rasheichem, Sheftechem, Zikneichem, Malkeichem, Nesheichem. So he says, Mela, everything, there's a lot of women, there's a lot of people, Gadim, there's a lot of leaders, but Malkeichem, there's only one king. What is Malkeichem?
Oh.
It's a question, right? Someone in the back of the show lifts up his hand and says, it doesn't say Malkeichem in the pasuk. So the Rav thinks for a moment, says, now, that's a good answer, but I have another answer. And he proceeds with his speech. Anyways. So Akapanim, everything in Tanya is relevant to us and the level where we are. And some areas some areas we're tzaddikim, where we're passionate and excited about. Some areas we're baining. We struggle, but we do the right thing. And we know that we'll always do the right thing. It isn't, even though we struggle, even though that perhaps we're not interested. So for many of us, davening every morning, we're abandoning it. Davening and putting on tefillin. We wake up in the morning, I don't want to daven, I don't want to put it, but we know we will. It's again, I'm talking for many of us over here. And some areas we're rasha v'toivle. And in some areas we're rasha v'rala. In some areas, unfortunately, we don't have any charat anymore. In that area, we've lost our connection with our neshama to the point that it's. So therefore, everything we're talking about really is something. Again, there's the person who's the paradigm of the rasha gomer. That obviously, the fact that you're here in this room proves by definition that you're not that, because there's a chassid in Karaitz. If I brings a lot of older chassid, and he says, we come to Shul Slichas, and we say, "V'ruach kadshcha al tikach mimenu." Don't take away your ruach. What do you mean? Maybe you took it away from us already. How do you know you have it? You're saying it in. So he said, if you're in shul, you still have it. The fact that you're in shul saying slichas, that means that you still have it. So there's no one here who's a rasha gomer. I can say that with relative assurance. But from that perspective, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't take to our hearts and realize that maybe look at those areas, because at the end of the day, if I have a charata on something, if I regret something, that means that my nefesh elokis is still active in that area. If my nefesh is still active in that area, that means that ultimately one day I can get my nefesh elokis to be the stronger one in that area, and become a beinoni in that area, and become a sadik in that area. But if it's empty, if there is no charata, then that's the biggest problem that there could be. The biggest problem is when there is no charata, and that's something to examine ourselves and those areas in our life, and maybe start working on those areas in our life to make sure that at least a rasha gomer that we should never be in any area of our life.
Rabbi,